ratio to their resistance is small enough that they will follow a very similar pattern. And that, of course, leads you to a natural understanding of acceleration and the gravitational attraction. If you repeat it, mathematics will fall quite as fast, and you can actually measure that. But it will still fall, and it's pretty close. If you repeat it in various areas, you'll find that there's slight variation. If you're near a mountain and so forth, it falls at a slightly different angle and so forth. But all of that is close enough that you can establish a kind of a general law. And if you go and watch and see that the falling happens, but it happens in a different way, and it's predictable upon the mass of the moon and the diameter of the moon, that using science at that point, and even though it isn't precisely reproducible, it's close enough reproducible to where it's reasonable to call science. And for that reason, even though forensic science is perhaps not precisely reproducible in that way, there is an underlying scientific pattern to it. Methodological naturalism, in essence, is simply, if it's a rule of thumb, it's a rule of saying let's ignore God inside of our laboratories, which I think is fair. If it's an absolute rule for every event in the universe, then it becomes philosophical naturalism, in fact, if not in definition. And philosophical naturalism is simply the attempt to, methodological naturalism is adopted as an absolute rule. It's basically saying, if you do science, you must make atheists comfortable. That's the problem with the definition of science. If we inculcate that into our children in this classroom to say that that is the only science, then the definition of the scientific method should be revisited. Yeah, well, the definition that was taught way back when, and that I think still has merit, is you make a hypothesis, you say what your hypothesis predicts, you go out and you test it, and then you revise your hypothesis depending on what the tests are, or maybe even throw it out, depending on how bad it is. And I think that's the strength of science. It's not that we use methodological naturalism, per se. And what's happened is that the strength of science has been kind of, if I can put it that way, hijacked to serve the purposes of excluding God from nature entirely. And I think that's wrong. Yes? It seems to me the suggestion of methodological naturalism that it's what you can observe and so on. Of course, we know it's not followed, but the idea tends to prevail to a certain extent. And you can ask the question, is that not an arbitrary level by which to define science? You could redefine science as you accept only that which you can smell. And that would be more of an arbitrary definition. And I would say that that's the line that is which tends to exclude God. Nothing says that there's not truth beyond that. So that it is a somewhat an arbitrary line that can be one that gets rid of God. But it's certainly no criterion for finding truth. If God exists, then you say we're going to deal with something that doesn't include God, and obviously you're not dealing with all of reality. Of course, scientism kind of likes to say that science is all there is, or at least all that is important that there is. Yes?
As a non-scientist, I am having new enlightenment about methodological naturalism today. It seems to me that all this business about the God of the gaps and how that's such a bad thing, methodological naturalism is just the flip side of that. Whenever you come up against a thing that you don't know understand, you just plug in your theory. And it's exactly the same thing. And how can these two sides criticize each other? I don't understand that.
Well, sometimes that's been referred to as the evolution of the gaps, which says if you can't explain it on an evolutionary basis, well, just wait, it'll get here. And really, that's basically the flip side of the God of the gaps. The question is, if you don't have all the evidence available, then are you going to assume that some God did it, or are you going to assume that there's some natural process that can explain it? And these people say, well, you should assume that there's some natural process that can explain it. And that only works if either you know God doesn't exist, or you know God wouldn't do that. And knowing God doesn't exist is a bit of a stretch. And knowing that God wouldn't do that, in my opinion, is even more of a stretch, especially when most of the people who do this would admit that Jesus was resurrected. So God does step into history. So why can't he step into prehistory? Yeah.
Whenever there is some kind of interaction between unequals, there is always lots of opportunity for plenty of misunderstanding and misconstruing and misinterpretation and such like. The Old Testament is rife with it. When Israelites were going through the desert, they had the pillar of cloud by day and of fire by night. And yet they clamored at Moses as if it was Moses' fault that whatever happened. They had repeated uprisings against Moses, as if he's the one who's guiding the pillar of cloud or fire, either way. No amount of evidence was sufficient to dissuade them from their convictions in the matter. And no outcome was sufficient to change their view of things. Whether God himself intervened and proved the matter or not, they still blame Moses. Isn't that an interesting observation? So the question that arises in circumstances is, why is that the case? We have similar situations as a student and mentor. And you look at what's going on there, and you think, so a mentor's patience is interpreted by student as, he hasn't done enough for me. And if the mentor really does intervene, or you try to dictate to me how to think. I mean, is there a safe place? You try one thing, you try another, you hope that at some point a light will go on, and something will happen. But there is no a priori guarantee that any one intervention, however well intentioned, is going to have that outcome. And this is true with students, with younger people, as well as older people. When we are determined to see things a certain way, we can always find a justification for continuing in our viewpoint, no matter what evidence is there to contradict it. And that is the frightening thing. If I recall a passage from the first chapter in Patriarchs and Prophets, it talks about how Jesus tried to counsel Lucifer, while there was still an opportunity for him to avoid the, shall we say, the ultimate downfall. And all the kindness and courtesy and care with which Christ tried to counsel with him, Lucifer interpreted as weakness. This whole thing doesn't add up too much. I can really prove that I'm strong enough to accomplish what I aim to accomplish. It is fascinating how things can be interpreted when one is willing to interpret them a certain way.
So you see this kind of thing in the history of Elijah. He's just done a demonstration that the Lord is God, that the people accepted, and Jezebel's reaction is not to say, oh, you had it right, no. It is to say, no, you're going to be dead man by tomorrow.
By definition.
Right. And the same thing is true of Jesus and his resurrection. Yes. The temple guard, it was probably the temple guard, not actually Roman soldiers that made the guard in the tomb, because they reported to the high priest. And there was such a thing as temple guard, and that's why when Pilate said something that can be interpreted both ways, it's probably best interpreted. You have a guard, make it safe as you can. So the temple guard comes back to them. And even if it was Roman soldiers, somebody came back to them and said, look, this is what happened. And the high priest, instead of saying, oh no, we goofed it, he really is the Messiah, they go, listen, just tell everybody the disciples came and stole the body. You're just going, obviously, these people are not about to let a few facts get in the way of their theory. And if there's anything that science has to say, it is that you better let the facts get in the way of your theory.
That's right. That's the truth side.
Otherwise, you won't find the right theory.
Yeah. So what proof is that?
Just a minute. Let's get your comment, because I can't hear. I'm not quite as good at hearing as I used to be. So
on the basis of that statement, does science have need of God? Does one have a place in science? If it's fact-based, can we ever prove or disprove his existence? If we wish to continue learning. So if it's observation-based, then we operate on, well, I at least operate on the perception that we seek to understand him, but we can never fully understand him because he's just above us, beyond us. Is it wrong that we exclude the search for God from those scientific pursuits?
Well, as we'll talk about next week, there's actually two ways of doing this. One of them is to say science is a limited enterprise and it doesn't involve God. Then in that case, one has to say, well, science is a limited enterprise, and if God exists, we're going to have to move beyond science in order to understand all the truth. The other way of saying it is that true science will go after the truth regardless, and therefore will be open to evidence for God. And either one of those will allow you to find truth, either admitting the limitations of science or defining science in such a way that it can, in fact, interact with every other form of knowledge. In which case, I personally prefer the latter, to say that science is not completely closed off from everything else. That's why the failure of the demarcation criteria that's been noticed by philosophers of science for a long time. And so if it is open to the possibility of God, then it has to be a little bit careful about what it dictates in terms of the possibilities.